Ghost Galaxy's crowdfunding campaign for the new Keyforge set, Winds of Exchange, has launched, and it was successfully funded in under 28 minutes. This means that Keyforge is definitely coming back, and hopefully in a big way. There are multiple pledge levels and stretch goals have already been unlocked. The campaign is running until the 26th of September, so follow the link in the description and make sure you get your hands on some Keyforge Winds of Exchange when it releases in early 2023. Hello Keyforgers and welcome back. This is going to be the second cycle in our deck opening and analysis series because we have done one deck from each expansion so far, so we are back to Call of the Archons. Let's get into it. Okay, right way up. Yep, today we have Dis, Sanctum and Brobnar, Dimmer of Ziohome Borderlands, and that's a very nice blue Archon, lightning in the background, triangle cape or shoulder pads, I'm not too sure. Looks pretty cool. Let's have a look and see what we have. There is a closer look at that Archon for you. Taking the bottom card out and we're turning over, we're starting out with Sanctum. We have Mantle of the Zealot, it's an upgrade. This creature gains, you may use this creature as if it belonged to the active house. Sergeant Zachiel, 4 power, 1 armor, play, you may ready and fight with a neighboring creature. A second Sergeant Zachiel. Raiding Knight, 4 power, 2 armor, play, capture 1 amber. Protectrix, 5 power, Reap, you may fully heal a creature. If you do, that creature cannot be dealt damage for the remainder of the turn. Virtuous Words is an action, and you get 3 amber when you play it. Terms of Redress is an action, you get an amber when you play it. Play, choose a friendly creature to capture 2 amber. Take Hostages is an action, you get an amber when you play it. Play, for the remainder of the turn, each time a friendly creature fights, it captures 1 amber. A second Take Hostages. Radiant Truth is an action, you get an amber when you play it. Play, stun each enemy creature not on a flank. Clear Mind is an action, you get an amber when you play it. Play, unstun each friendly creature. Blinding Light is an action, you get an amber when you play it. Play, choose a house, stun each creature of that house. On to Dis, we're starting out with Tentacus, 5 power. Your opponent must pay you 1 amber in order to use an artifact. Succubus, 3 power. During their draw card step, your opponent refills their hand to 1 less card. A second Succubus. Ember Imp, 2 power. Your opponent cannot play more than 2 cards each turn. Dominator Bauble is an artifact. Action, use a friendly creature. Key Hammer is an action, you get an amber when you play it. Play, if your opponent forged a key on their previous turn, unforge it. Your opponent gains 6 amber. Hysteria is an action. Play, return each creature to its owner's hand. Tendrils of Pain is an action. You get an amber when you play it. Play, deal 1 damage to each creature. Deal an additional 3 damage to each creature if your opponent forged a key on their previous turn. Gateway to Dis is an action. Play, destroy each creature, gain 3 chains. A second Gateway to Dis. And a third Gateway to Dis. Ooh, that might be too many. Arise is an action. Play, choose a house, return each creature of that house from your discard pile to your hand. Gain 1 chain. And finally into Brobnar, we're starting out with a War Drummer, 3 power. Play, return each other friendly Brobnar creature to your hand. Headhunter, 5 power. Fight, gain 1 amber. Gengar Chieftain, 5 power. Play, you may ready and fight with a neighbouring creature. Fire Spitter, 5 power, 1 armor. Before fight, deal 1 damage to each enemy creature. A second Fire Spitter. Pile of Skulls is an artifact. Each time an enemy creature is destroyed during your turn, a friendly creature captures 1 amber. Smith is an action, you get an amber when you play it. Play, gain 2 amber if you control more creatures than your opponent. Loot the Bodies is an action. Play, for the remainder of the turn, gain 1 amber each time an enemy creature is destroyed. A second Loot the Bodies. Coward's End is an action. Play, destroy each undamaged creature, gain 3 chains. A second Coward's End. Champion's Challenge is an action. Play, Destroy each enemy creature except the most powerful enemy creature. Destroy each friendly creature except the most powerful friendly creature. Ready and fight with your remaining creature. And there we have it. There is a lot of chains in that deck, but let's take a closer look. If we get straight into the breakdown of this deck, it had 12 printed amber. There were a whopping 20 actions, 13 creatures, 2 artifacts, and 1 soul upgrade. The deck is considered to have a bit of everything, but I would say it's definitely lacking a little bit in artifact control. But if we kick off with amber control, we have Pile of Skulls. It's the artifact, and every time an enemy creature is destroyed during your turn, a friendly creature captures 1. Now this is capture. We do have, like I said, only 13 creatures, which is slightly below the average, I would say. But the Brobnar creatures we do have, they're 5 power. They're pretty sturdy. Yes, board wipes will take them out, but your opponent might have a bit of a hard time getting the amber off them, especially if you control the board. We did have Tentacus. Again, 5 power. It has a passive effect of your opponent must pay you 1 amber in order to use an artifact. Which means that if they don't have any amber, they cannot use that specific artifact. So keeping Tentacus on the board is your only form of artifact control in this deck. And it would also count towards amber generation. In Sanctum, we had the Raiding Knight. 4 power, 2 armor, play, capture 1. Again, it is capture. Terms of Redress, the action with an amber pip. Choose a friendly creature to capture 2 amber. So there is a lot of capture in this deck. And again, we'll finish off with Take Hostages, 2 actions. For the remainder of the turn, each time a friendly creature fights, it captures 1. Now that does go onto the creature, so your opponent will get it back if your creature is destroyed. Now there were some other amber control cards that weren't listed under amber control, but I feel they might help towards limiting the amount of amber that your opponent can have, and that is Blinding Light. It's an action, and when you play it, you choose a house, and then you stun each creature of that house. Now that does include any creatures of that house that are yours as well. It's not just your opponent's. Whereas Radiant Truth, again another action, play, stun each enemy creature not on a flank. So the 2 flank creatures are fine, anything in between is getting stunned. I've mentioned it before and I'll keep mentioning it. Stun is, I think, underrated in Keyforge. It is very annoying to deal with. And then finally in this we had Key Hammer. Now you might be thinking, how can Key Hammer be under amber control? Because it says play. If your opponent forged a key on their previous turn, they unforge it, then your opponent gains 6 amber. So yes, you're giving them 6 amber back, and if they paid 6 amber for the key, it's a straight switch, but it means they're 1 key short. So if they're on 2 keys and they would win next turn by forging their 3rd, doing this, yes, they're going to have 12 plus amber sitting in their pool, but they can only forge 1 key in their forge a key step. So unless they've got a key cheat, I have lost a few games with this card played on me. I have heard of a few games where this is pulled through something like Wild Wormhole. Now, because of the wording on the card, it says if your opponent forged the key on their previous turn, unforge it. And then it says your opponent gains 6 amber. It does not say if this did happen, your opponent gains 6 amber. It's just your opponent gains 6 amber. So if you Wild Wormhole into this on, say, turn 1 or 2 and your opponent has no keys, you're still giving them 6 amber. So just be careful if you have it in your deck and you've got any kind of ability to play the top card of your deck. If we now look at expected amber, we'll start with Brobnar again, and we have Headhunter, 5 power, fight, gain 1 amber. And yes, you do need to survive the fight for that to happen. We have 2 Loot the Bodies. They're action cards, and it says play. For the remainder of the turn, gain 1 amber each time an enemy creature is destroyed. So this can be done through fighting your creatures into their creatures. It can also be done through board wipes and direct damage. We do have some in Brobnar, and we'll look at that when we get to creature control. We have the Smith. It's an action, amber when you play it, and when you play it, you gain 2 amber if you control more creatures than your opponent. So you really want to try and hold the board here to set up for a nice Loot the Bodies. It activates the Smith, and there are cards in other houses that will slow down your opponent's deck as well. In Sanctum, we have Mantle of the Zealot. It's the only upgrade in the deck. But it says this creature gains. You may use this creature as if it belonged to the active house. Whatever you put this on, you will be able to use it every single turn, no matter what house you call. Then we have Virtuous Works. 3 amber, action. That's it. You play it, you get 3 amber. In this first set, Call of the Archons, there weren't things like Infernus, so there was never any hesitation on playing high amber cards like this. If you are playing a Worlds Collide or Mass Mutation deck, just be careful that if an Infernus hits that, you are losing 3 amber and purging that card. And finally, in Dis, we have Artifact Dominator Bauble. With an action, use a friendly creature. So you have to call Dis to use the artifact, but then you can use any friendly creature. So it is a house cheat when you're playing the Dis house. With 13 creatures in the deck, you're going to want to maintain ball control to set up for those loot the bodies. And I would expect the majority of the time you'll want to save those for fighting when you have those in hand. Reaping, you've only got 13 creatures. It's going to be a little bit slower than other decks, but with 12 printed amber, shouldn't be too bad. There aren't many cards with amber on that you're not going to want to play, except maybe Keyhammer. As for artifact control, as we mentioned before, we just had the Tentacus. 5 power, your opponent pays you 1 amber or must pay you 1 amber in order to use an artifact. So if you keep your opponent's amber count low by capturing the amber, then they won't be able to activate any of their artifacts which require an action. Now on to the big chunk of this deck, which is creature control. There was a lot. If we start off with Brobnar, we have those 2 Coward's End. Play, destroy each undamaged creature, gain 3 chains. Now if you do have a loot the bodies in hand and your opponent has a board, this could be very beneficial for you to play. It does affect your own creatures though, and it does give you a really hefty 3 chains. And it will not destroy any damaged creatures. So there's a little bit of anti-synergy in this deck, especially when you come to some Brobnar creatures later on. We have Champion's Challenge. It's an action. You destroy each enemy creature except the most powerful one, and then you destroy each friendly creature except the most powerful one, and then ready and fight with our creature. So if you're going to do this, make sure, if it's a Brobnar creature, you've at least reaped or fought with it first, so you get that extra amber or that extra bit of damage on your opponent's creature. But technically, it's almost a board wipe. We have the Gengar Chieftain. 5 power, you may ready and fight with a neighbouring creature, which does help with what we have is 2 Fire Spitters. Now, this is some of the anti-synergy I talked about with Coward's End, because it will damage your opponent's creatures before fight, but it will also help towards loot the bodies. Because it happens before the fight, it's very good for knocking down creatures' health before you fight into them and popping off nasty little wards as well. If we move on to Sanctum, we have that Blinding Light and Radiant Truth like we discussed before with those stuns. We also have 2 Sergeant Zachiel, I think it's Zachiel because it's Zachiel. 4 power, 1 armor. When you play it, you may ready and fight with a neighbouring creature. That neighbouring creature does not have to be Sanctum. It is a house cheat, but it is just for a fight. If your opponent has no creatures on the board, and you play this, and you ready a creature, and you cannot fight with it, you can only reap with it if it is Sanctum. If it's a Brobnar or a Dis creature, you can't do anything because it is technically out of turn for that house. Tendrils of Pain. Deal 1 damage to each creature. And then you deal an additional 3 damage to each creature if your opponent forged a key on their previous turn. So if you get that in hand with a key hammer and your opponent's got a board, it can be quite devastating to have those both played in the same turn. We have Hysteria. Return each creature to its owner's hand. That's yours and your opponent's. Okay, there's no chains involved in this. It's just dumping all creatures in play into the opponent's hand. A nice way of hand locking your opponent if they've got creatures from all 3 houses out. And it will allow you to repopulate your board with Dis creatures after you've done this as well. Then we have what I consider to be overkill, which is 3 Gateway to Dis. Actions, when you play it, you destroy each creature. That's it, board wipe, boom, gone. Nothing left, unless they're warded. But then you gain 3 chains. So it's actually a better version of Coward's End, because it doesn't matter if the creature's damaged or not damaged. situational, I would say, Coward's End was. This one is just a straight clear. Now, it's not Omega, like Unlocked Gateway, so you can, again, repopulate your board after you played this. Personally, I feel there's too much board control in here, which would be great against the occasional deck that just floods the board with creatures, but you might find yourself discarding 1 or 2 Gateways to Dis just to free up some space in your hand and draw into other cards. If we look at something like efficiency in this deck, it's quite negative. There are a lot of cards that give you chains. We have the Hysteria, the Arise, which we're going to look at in a second, the 2 Coward's End, and the 3 Gateways to Dis. This is not a fast deck if you keep playing those cards. Like I said, if you're going to clear the board, make sure you can repopulate it afterwards, especially if you're playing Disc. There was one recursion card in here, and it's actually a negative efficiency card because it does give you chains, but it's choose a house. You return each creature of that house from your discard pile to your hand, and then you gain 1 chain. So unfortunately, they do not go in your archives, so it will lock your hand for the end of the turn. But if you have 4 or 5 creatures of one house in your discard pile because you've board wiped on this turn, it does mean you can repopulate next turn as well. But like I said, if you've just killed most of your disc creatures with something like Gateway to Dish, you can play this, put them back in your hand, and then put them back on the board. Kind of the same as Hysteria, but just gaining 3 more chains. Now, there was some disruption in these decks. We had the Hysteria, which we looked at, returning creatures to their owner's hand. We had 2 Succubus. Now, these are annoying because it's a passive effect. There's no reap or action required for it to happen. It just says, during their draw cards step, your opponent refills their hand to 1 less card. Maximum hand size is 6. You've got 2 Succubus on the board. Your opponent is drawing up to 4. That's going to limit the options that they have. And then we have the Ember Imp, 2 power, again a passive effect. Your opponent cannot play more than 2 cards each turn. Have these 3 out on the board and your opponent is going to have a very tough time if they cannot remove them. 4 card hand limit and only being able to play 2 cards per turn, it's going to dramatically slow down their deck. So these could be considered part of Amber control, but not directly. And if you have to play all the Hysterias, Arises, Coward's Ends and Gateways to Dis, then slowing your opponent down as much as you're going to have with the chains might put you back on level pegging again. Now, it must be noted that these 3 creatures, when they enter play, your opponent will gun for them big time because of the detrimental effect they have. There were a few cards that weren't included anywhere, but actually work very, very well. We had the Clear Mind. Now, it's a rare. You get an amber when you play it, so there's no reason not to play this card because it just says unstun each friendly creature. If you're up against a Sanctum deck and they've got lots of stuns, this can come in really handy. We have the Protectrix, 5 power. Reap, you may fully heal a creature. If you do, that creature cannot be dealt damage for the remainder of the turn. Very good to play on another Sanctum creature because then you can fight into it. If that creature has Mantle of the Zealot, it can also be from Dis, or you could have a lovely Brobnar creature as well. And then we have War Drummer. 3 power. When you play it, you return each other friendly Brobnar creature to your hand. So this is one way you might be able to pull off, say, a really cool Coward's End. Now, if you choose Brobnar and you have your Brobnar turn, so you've reaped your creatures, you've attacked, you've done all your actions, all your creatures are exhausted, you'll go, okay, War Drummer, and you'll return them all to your hand. Now, we do have creatures such as Gengar Chieftain, which again, when you play it, you can ready and fight with a neighbouring creature. So if you've played down your Fire Spitters again, you can get a bit more damage in there. War Drummer is just a very, very good card. And do remember that any creatures that are returned to your hand, the damage is taken off. So you could do a round of fighting, play your War Drummer, return all the Brobnar creatures to your hand, play them again, they're fully healed. And then you ready up at the end of your turn. I've seen some very weird turns and very good turns when a deck has 2 or 3 War Drummers in it, because it is quite funny, because if you've got 2 War Drummers, you can return 1 War Drummer to your hand. Then you get into a big thing about the rule of 6 and how many times you can do everything. It does get quite fun, quite annoying if you're playing against it, but there we go. If you're interested in the scoring of this deck, it was a 70 SAS deck, and they consider it in the top 25% of decks, according to SAS scoring. I think it's pretty cool. The disruption is nice with those Succubus and the Ember Imp. You've got some really nice Brobnar controlling turns, and if you can maintain that Brobnar board, couple of loot the bodies, and you could really ramp up in Amber. I do feel there is a little too much board control. That is something you won't hear me say often, but I think 3 Gateways, 2 Coward's End, Champions Challenge, that's a lot. You will be discarding them in this deck. All that remains for me to say is good luck, have fun, keep forging.